Hello and welcome to Dateline Democracy. My name is Peter Roussel, and at Sam Houston State University, I fulfill the Philip G. Warner Endowed Chair in the Department of Mass Communication. What is Dateline Democracy? This is a group of students, a group of students who are in a class. It's an independent study class. And this semester, in conjunction with the 2020 presidential election, they are visiting with prominent members of the national news media to get their insights on the 2020 election, and equally important, to get perspectives and insights from them about their individual careers. And the hope is that getting such information will be useful to these students as they go about launching their careers. This is all under the sponsorship of the College of Arts and Media and the Department of Mass Communication at Sam Houston State University. My co-host for this program is Clinical Professor of Political Science, Mike Yawn. And I'm going to toss it to Mike here in just a couple of minutes. But before we do that, I would like to just make a personal comment about today's guest. And it's this: I have known today's guest, Sam Donaldson, and worked with him since 1966. I have worked with him in venues all over the world, around the globe, as he was covering stories related to the presidency. And I've come away from that experience with this observation about Sam. In my view, he is one of the most intense but thorough reporters to cover the modern institution of the presidency. So Sam, as we say at Sam Houston, welcome to Sam.
Well, Pete, it's a pleasure to be with you, Professor Russo. Let me just tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. I have known this man as long as he's known me. We're even on that score. And we have worked, he says, with each other and against each other, because the role of the press secretary, and Pete has been a press secretary to George Herbert Walker Bush, to Ronald Reagan. He's been assistant to two presidents in their White House regimes, Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan. And we've worked against each other in the sense that we had different jobs. Pete's job was to put forward information, but put it in the best possible light for a president or for the person he was attached to. And my job was not to tear that information down necessarily, but to check it and to ask questions that maybe were not as polite. I think we always were in those days. We'll talk about today a little later, but that were challenging. And so Pete would be up there, and Helen Thomas, the great Helen Thomas of UPI days, no longer with us. I would be there, and several other reporters, and we'd have at each other. And then afterward, Pete, we'd go out and have a drink together. Now here's mine, where's yours? I salute you. But it's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you, Sam. I thought I'd just ask you a couple of quick questions, and then I'll turn it over to Mike and the students for their questions. But let me ask you first, Sam. Everybody calls you a living legend. I hear that all the time. Oh, he's a living. Does that bother you to be called a living legend?
Well, it bothers me in several different ways. And one is that the word legend is one word away from the word calcification. I mean, a living legend. I'm 86. I'll be 87 in March. I'm still here, but not in any legendary sense. And people sometimes say to me, well, what do you think your major contribution to the business, the news business? Because that's what we were doing. And I was in Washington for 52 years and it was. And I said, well, the contribution was just to try to do my job and escape with my reputation somewhat intact. I never considered that I was making some major contribution to the news business. And I don't think many reporters and people, journalists that I know, think of themselves as creating something, but simply doing their job. I tried to do it. Pete did hit, and we got along just fine.
Sam, there's one other thing I've been hoping could ask you, and I want to see if you remember this moment. You probably won't, but I witnessed it, so I know it's true. And I cite this moment to my press and presidency class when I'm talking about ways to cover the presidency. And my theory is one way is through just sheer intensity. And the example I cite is at the end of the 1984 presidential campaign, Ronald Reagan running for re-election. We were working our way across the country, East Coast to West, because we were going to end up in Los Angeles on election night. It was toward the end of the week, and we were in Utah. We were pulling in late one afternoon. I think it was Ogden, Utah. Reagan was going to give a speech out on the airport tarmac. It was all going to be very brief.
Well, I remember it well, but go ahead.
Okay, well, let's see if my version matches yours. So anyway, you were on the press charter plane. So for those that aren't aware, that's a plane that flies about an hour ahead of Air Force One and lands, so all the cameras can set up and everybody can get situated. And you can see the picture you see on the nightly news of the president coming down the steps of Air Force One. We got there late, and you were on, all the broadcast reporters were on deadline. You were on East Coast deadline. We land, we taxi up near where the speech is going to be on the tarmac, and the doors to the plane would not open, either the back door or the front door. And here you and others are on deadline, and we can't get the doors open. So I said, well, we're just going to have to wait. Well, you and I were standing up at the front of the plane, and at that moment, the catering service came up and attached itself to the side of the plane there. And you see that at airports when you're getting on a plane. So it's open there to the ground. And I'd say we were about 20 feet up. You started climbing down the innards of that airplane. And I said, Sam, don't do it. You're going to break your legs, everything. Plus it was dirty. It was oily. You got finally to the top of one of the tires. And that's about 10 to 12 feet off the ground. And finally you eased down and jumped the rest of the way onto the tarmac. I thought, he's broken his legs. I look out one of the windows and I can see you running toward the podium there. I said, if that isn't intensity in covering a president of the United States, I've never seen it.
That was not intensity, it was fear. You're right, I do remember that incident. I knew when you said Ogden, Utah, exactly what you were going to talk about. I had to make air, and looking at my watch, I had about, 30 seconds. It's not a question of, can I get there? Can I straighten my tie? Can I, no, get there. Because the greatest sin in the business is to not be there. For instance, 6:30 Eastern for the evening news was 6:30. It didn't mean 6:30 and 30 seconds. It didn't mean show up at 6:33. It meant be there. And if you could do that, you've done your job. So you just reminded me of something. Perhaps I can say to your students that if you want to remember me, well, he made a contribution to the business. Yes, indeed. That name is now not quite up there with Edward R. Murrow or Walter Cronkite or Peter Jennings or what have you, but it's right up there. No, he's the guy who made air by jumping out of an airplane without a parachute.
Well, I will continue to cite that in my class. Mike Yon, please take it away.
Sam, the example you cited is from the Reagan era, and you covered 3 different presidents, I think, as a White House correspondent. And of course, in general, you covered every president since 1967. But why is it that you think that you're so identified with Ronald Reagan?
Well, I used to say several things about that, which is that Reagan illuminated the scene. He was a forceful personality, whether you liked his policy on this or didn't like it or that, or did admire him. Well, he was someone that made a difference from the standpoint of presentation, from the standpoint of what he accomplished. Again, whether you thought it was all good or not is not what I'm talking about. And that was an illumination that if you were standing around someplace, you were in the light. Yes, I mean, if you cover a president who doesn't have the opportunity to do much, well, you're not going to be noticed because he, someday she, but he wasn't noticed either. But you noticed Ronald Reagan, so you noticed me and other reporters. And secondly, in the case of the two of us, I always knew he was president of the United States and I wasn't. I was a reporter, but I think it was a case sometimes of two hams recognizing each other. And I would deliver straight lines, and he would then do one of those one-liners that often made it. Once when he was leaving the hospital after being shot, he came out And the question was, well, Mr. President, what are you going to do when you get back to the White House? And he said, sit down. Well, of course. If he had said, well, I'm going to start looking at the data on the latest problem with the Soviet Union. No, sit down. I mean, I've been shot. And that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people admired him, again, whether they liked everything he did or not.
Thank you for that answer. And Pete, I'm going to break the rules a little bit and ask you two a joint question. How does your job, and I'm asking this to both, we'll let Sam lead, but how does your job approach change knowing who's on the other end of the microphone? So how did you do your job differently knowing that it was Peter Roussel and Reagan rather than Jimmy Carter or rather than Mike McCarthy or I can't remember Bill Clinton's press secretary? And then Pete, if you can follow up by how did you do your job different knowing that Sam Donaldson was going to fire away a question? You knew that he was going to ask a question, and how did you anticipate that and try to react? So I'll turn it over to the two of you.
If I'm to start, now today is different from all the other days that I've known in Washington, and I think other reporters would tell you even before I got to Washington, which was 2 weeks after John Kennedy was inaugurated. Today is different. So don't take what I say now about working with press secretaries. But I didn't make a differentiation, of course, except for their personalities, because the press secretaries I worked with, and Pete is an example, they didn't lie. Well, they dodged, they weaved, they tried to put the best foot forward, they mumbled, they changed the subject. They didn't lie. Because in those days, if you lied as a press secretary, you were dead. I mean, and if you did that, you were not serving your boss properly, because why would I believe you when you said something that he wanted disseminated and he wanted the public to believe it and I would report it honestly? Why would I believe you if you've been lying to me on other matters? I wouldn't report it that way, and he wouldn't be well served. So it's a question of how you differentiate among the press secretaries. Each one had their personality. Pete was a rascal, and he also knew how to diffuse. Well, he was. All right, Mike. He also knew how to diffuse. He smiled. He laughed. He didn't sit there grimly. And if you ask him a pretty tough question, and he knew the answer was not going to be one that really showed his boss to be the most magnificent president of all time, instead of looking grim and saying, how dare you ask a question like that? Ask an answer to listen, and then try to turn the tables. He would laugh and scratch himself, and it's effective. I always tell people, if you want to know how to get along with the press, whether you're a CEO of a corporation or a president, what have you, don't treat the reporter who comes to you initially as an enemy. Say, okay, I'll work with you until the reporter proves to you that he or she is not going to be straight. And there are those people in our business. Not many, I don't think, at least not in the days that I worked, because they didn't last if they did, because we drive them out. Presidents wouldn't have to, Pete wouldn't have to drive them out of the press room. Other reporters would drive them out. There's the expression in the finance, bad money drives out good. Well, we didn't want reporters who were not doing the job properly to be in the press room with us. I've gone a little too long. I have answered your question by filibustering, which is another technique press secretaries have learned and can use. But basically, I got along with almost all of them. And I think whether they got along with me, you'd have to ask them.
Pete, did you talk in the back rooms and say, well, Sam's almost certainly going to ask this question, or he's going to approach this? Did you kind of know which questions were going to come from which reporters?
Not always, but you knew they were going to be tough and well thought out, whatever they might be. I think I can answer your question, Mike, real simply here about Sam, about a question from Sam. I will never forget, it's indelible in my memory, the first time I had to go out and do a briefing in the White House press briefing room. And I felt pretty confident about it. And as I was walking into the briefing room, I looked across that room and I said, wait a minute, I know most of these reporters. They're my friends. I've worked with them for the last 20, 25 years. They'll take it easy on me because we're friends. That was actually my mindset. I stepped up. This is absolutely true. I stepped up to the podium. I looked down at that front row. And in those days, you talk about a front row, Sam Donaldson, Helen Thomas, Leslie Stahl, Andrea Mitchell, Chris Wallace, Bill Plant. I mean, just the very top reporters. And I looked down at Sam. He was sitting right where he always did there on the front row. And he kind of looked at me. It was one of those moments where you know your thoughts are kind of connecting. And he looked up at me, and in a very assertive voice, he pointed his finger at me and he said, "No deals, no deals." And right away, I knew what he was saying was, yes, you and I are friends, but you, buddy, you just stepped into my workspace and I'm getting ready to come at you with everything I got. So you better be ready. I had about a 1 second to change my mindset. I thought, what am I thinking that they're going to take it easy on me? They weren't about to do that at all. And they shouldn't have, absolutely. So I'm glad he did that for me, because it helped me adjust my mindset of where it should have been, which was I'm out here to do the best job I can for the president and my administration. But Sam will be forever in my memory for that one little moment. It'll be in my memoir, Sam.
Well, and those group of reporters you just mentioned in the front row, murderer's row, you might consider. Leslie's still doing it. Leslie Stahl's in there. Go, girl, go. Get it.
And Sam, you mentioned Leslie Stahl. Of course, she's receiving death threats this week. So
Of course.
we're calling that the Dateline democracy effect. A week after appearing on our show, she's appearing death threats. So hopefully you'll be okay next week.
Well, you know, if you look at the tape, the 60-minute tape, first the president put it out, the White House put it out, and then the 60 Minutes, I saw, just me, I saw nothing in what Leslie was asking that was rude, that was insulting. She was asking the obvious legitimate questions. And I wrote a little book once in which I said, there was no such things as a bad question. The irrelevant questions, silly questions, you wasted your time with that question. And the questions, no matter what they are, never hurt a president or a politician. The answers may hurt. The answers may hurt. Or I often told people when they said, it's a gotcha question, you tried to guess, wait a moment. If I ask a question I think is a legitimate question, the public would like to know the answer to, and a president or a press secretary like Pete answers it satisfactory to the public, I've done my job. It's not a question of, aha, did I get that person? No, I asked the question and I got an answer, and the answer either was satisfactory or not to the people watching, but it wasn't me. It was the question and it was the answer. And the answers were more important than the questions from the standpoint of affecting the public.
And Sam, you mentioned, not only the answers being important and people being able to read those, but you also referred to the press secretaries as generally honest people throughout your career, but really as early as, Nixon's Ron Ziegler, when something was exposed as false, he simply said that it was non-operational. Did you feel compelled to follow up on that, or did you feel that the public could see through that and reach their own conclusions?
Well, I was not the White House correspondent with Richard Nixon. I was the Watergate correspondent for ABC News, covered the trial of the Cubans, covered the Watergate committee session in the Senate, covered the impeachment investigation in the House of Representatives. But Ziegler lied a lot, but he lied in behalf of his president, which is no excuse, on the one thing. People look back on Richard Nixon. If he hadn't committed what would have been a felony had he been taken to court, and ordinary Americans go to jail for obstruction of justice and perjury and items like that, he would have gone down, I think, as a pretty good president. Again, I'm not questioning whether you should vote for him or not, but he handles foreign affairs, brought us into China, told us that 1.3 billion people existed out there. It was called Red China? No, it's called China. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Nixon, the Democrats love it, and I don't blame them, but he started it. He did a lot of things that I think were of service to the country. Vietnam is another question. Let's not get into that. But Ziegler lied, Nixon lied, but not serially, not ad seriatim, not, it was like getting up in the morning before you take a cup of coffee, you've done 10 lies. The president we have at the moment, does he know that he's lying? I think he does. Some people speculate that he really doesn't know. He doesn't know any better. And I'm not talking about whether he's ignorant on a subject. Presidents don't know everything, and certainly I can tell you reporters don't. But it is just a default mechanism to lie. And the thing that puzzles me and interests me, maybe in another session, you can turn the tables and let your bright students give some answers, is why do people accept it? Why does he have such a base of people that swear by him, that follow him as if he's the Pied Piper of Hamelin? Because if he is, to use the old story, he's leading them to their doom. Enough, Donaldson.
Sam, I think it's about 20 minutes into it. So Peter, do you think it's a good time to turn it over to some of the student questions?
Take it away.
And Sam, as we turn it over to the students, it's perhaps appropriate to point out that just last year, after the 4 Emmys and the 3 Peabodys and the Edward R. Murrow, you are now Dr. Donaldson.
Well, I've gone to universities and they have asked me to give a graduation speech from time to time, and then I've become Dr. Donaldson. But I have a son who has a real PhD. I mean, he earned it. I was there for his dissertation, and even was able to ask a question as his father sitting in the audience of the committee that was examining him. And he's an expert on substance abuse. And he talked about how you have to hit bottom, and then hitting bottom often gives you the chance then to come forward and people can help you. So my question is, well, son, how do you know when someone hits bottom? What's bottom? Never mind.
I think some people are maybe asking the president that too, Sam, but we're going to start broad with the student questions with Nick Henson. So Nick, do you want to tee it up for Mr. Donaldson, for Dr. Donaldson?
Well, call me Sam, Nick.
Good. Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Nick Henson. I'm a mass communications major for Sam Houston State University. And basically the question that I wanted to ask you was, what exactly was it like working for, the news station? Like how, was your experience?
Well, I started, well, I went to a small college in El Paso, Texas, then called Texas Western. Now it's the University of Texas at El Paso. And I made a gentleman's C, I think. But I spent a lot of my time working at local radio stations. We didn't have a television station until 1954, by last year in college. I graduated the next spring. But I played records. I was a disc jockey. Loved it. Ripped and read wire copy from the UPI wire machine. There were no local newsrooms and radio stations. But my first real job in the business was in Dallas. After I had gotten out of the Army, spent 2.5 years in the Army on active duty. We had a president too dumb to get us in the war, Dwight Eisenhower. Anyway, and I worked at KRLD, the CBS affiliate. After a year, it had a news department, but I did both news and announcing because that was what everyone did. But at least you got some experience in news. I went and I resigned. And the manager said, "Why are you leaving? You don't like?" I said, "Well, I had a good time here and I appreciate it. You want a raise?" No, I said, "I'm going to New York." And only the good Lord saved me from saying, "I'm going to New York to become a news star." I went to New York, and of course, New York took one look at me and said, "Well, we'll teach this hick to be humble." Because I was a farm boy from New Mexico originally. I won't continue the story except to say I got a job in Washington. And as I say, 2 weeks after John Kennedy was inaugurated, I loved the town. Here I met people that I'd seen on television and heard, and they were important people. And then I went out of the White House and President Kennedy at the Rose Garden I went to his news conferences, 3 of them, and I never had the courage to try to ask a question. I mean, I watched the big boys and girls, Sarah McClendon, May Craig, do the questioning. But Washington to me was the candy store, it was the factory. And to be able to watch the debate on the great civil rights bill of 1964, and watch the Southerners go down to defeat the filibuster, and watch Medicare be enacted. Those things were just so fascinating. And all the time I spent in Washington, I kept learning things. I was finally, when they finally got rid of me, I was probably now to the point where I could do a job better than I'd ever done it before.
Thank you, Nick. And Sam, thanks for that recollection back to the new frontier and the Great Society. I think Meredith has a question that brings us up to the very most topical time, the moment. So Meredith, go ahead. She's our political science major, Sam. All the others are mass comm, but here we have a political science major in our midst.
Yes, hi, I'm Meredith Charlton. I'm from Houston, Texas, and a junior political science major at SAM. And my first question was, what kind of implications do you think can Trump's claims of such large-scale voter fraud have on the election?
Well, everybody's worried about that, at least everybody who wants the president to either win or lose this election fairly. But we know this man, and forgive me, I must tell you that I'm an opponent of his. I'm no longer in the active news business. I don't have to hide my feelings. Not that some people thought I hid it in those days, but I've never seen anyone. I've never seen a president like this. I've never seen a politician, really. I've seen, hey, George C. Wallace, as governor of Alabama, once stole film that I just taken of him in Utah, Alabama in 1968. I say I took it, my cameraman did it, because he was shaking hands with people after giving his speech. He hadn't been shot yet, he wasn't in a wheelchair. And the cameraman said, hey, look who's coming. I said, well, who? He said, that's Robert Shelton. I said, who's Robert Shelton? He said, the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, the biggest Klan. And sure enough, Shelton came down and George Wallace shook his hand. And the moment he recognized who Shelton was, he stopped. He had his troopers come over and they grabbed the film and escaped. So my point, which I've probably forgotten exactly what the question was about this president. How should we handle him? At first, I thought, no, we shouldn't just say he lies. When he says something, say to the audience or your readers, the president said this today. However, others believe, and you quote to somebody else, or you say, he says the earth is flat and we believe it's not, and here are other things you can say. But I long since gave that up. This man is not just an ordinary liar. He has written a new book on it.
Mm-hmm.
When the truth would serve him better, he won't tell it. Because look what he did to Bob Woodward. Now, you could say anyone who thinks they can take Bob Woodward, or for that matter, almost any reporter, is a fool, because the reporter has infinite ability to check things, can go to sources forever to check something that somebody tells him or her. So here is this man thinking, because he thinks he can take anyone, I can win anyone. I'm the most successful person in the world. So I'll just call Bob up several times and add to the fact, and he's taping it, and I know he is, but of course I have no idea that what I'm saying will add to the idea that I had no idea what I'm doing. And of course, that's what happened to him. I believe he'll be defeated. Yes, you don't know until the votes are counted. And the question was about fraud a little while ago. How does it affect the election? Well, I think what's affecting the election adversely, to the extent it is going to be affected adversely, is the voter suppression that's going on in some states with the aid now of, well, the Supreme Court, who recently as you know, a political science major, in two decisions, I guess this week at least, this week, made certain that certain state couldn't extend the time it could receive ballots, made certain that, yes, if only one drop box is available in just every locale in the state, even the big ones where there's so many people, that's okay. Well, it's not okay. Common sense tells it's not okay if you want every vote to be cast and counted that's legitimate. I don't think it will bear on this election to the extent that you'll get away with it, or they'll get away with it. I think votes will be counted, they'll be counted fairly, and I'll make a prediction, which you can come back and laugh at me for, because I think it runs against what really the bright people are saying. I think we'll know who has won more than with 270 plus electoral votes on the early dawn morning after the election. Yes, I know votes will still be counted that have not been counted if it came in the mail, that were in the drop boxes in many states. And I know that the people who come to vote on election day are thought to be people who are to a large extent supporting President Trump more than people who are now sending in their ballots in many of these states. But I don't think we're going to have a prolonged count. We had one in Florida, so there's the opportunity to say, well, history says we have had one, at least in our time. And of course, back in 1870, never mind that. President tilted. But I think then the question is, if the president declares himself a winner and refuses to accept an immediate count, what happens? What happens in the courts and what happens to some extent in the streets? I don't think we're going to have gunfights all over the country. I don't think we're going to have two sides with AK-47s squaring off. There may be some violence and they may result in some terrible injuries and death, but not a lot. And I think our institutions will stand. Law enforcement agencies, there'll be a sheriff or two, this town or that town, but our law enforcement agencies, our courts, and ultimately the US military. The US military will not obey an order to give this man an election which he has not fairly won. Don't worry about it.
Sam, we don't have time for a whole lot of follow-ups, but Meredith has a closely related follow-up that goes to this question of trust and legitimacy. So Meredith, why don't you go ahead and follow up with that?
Okay, my second question was, what kind of long-term effects can President Trump's kind of broken relationship with the media have on potentially another Biden presidency or a second Trump presidency in terms of public trust?
Well, it's going to have some effect because everything is precedent, including the way reporters and press secretaries and presidents act with each other. But I think if Joe Biden becomes president, he will bring a team of people who don't lie. I don't think he'll come and say, now I've got to follow the precedent of lying about everything. I think he will set a new tone, and I think reporters, and I hope reporters, will forget how they had to act. I mean, we're human beings. Reporters are human beings. Yes, you're supposed to be professional. We're not there to have a shouting match that goes beyond, well, I don't believe what you said is correct here, and let me tell you why, and let me ask you this follow-up. Sometimes that got a little rough, huh, Pete? But you kept your cool. But I think that it will return to some sense of what I would have known had I come at my age and joined the press corps again. We'll be civil to each other, and it's business, and after business, we'll have a drink together.
Okay, thank you for answering those questions.
Very good, Meredith.
Thank you.
And Sam, we've got from those kind of topical moments to a very somber question from Savannah. So Savannah, and we're practicing our social distancing and COVID precautions here at SAM. Savannah, go ahead and ask your question to Sam.
Ask.
Hi, Mr. Donaldson. My name is Savannah Moffitt. I am a kinesiology major at Sam Houston State University. And my question to you is a bit personable. My question is, you reported the death of your producer the night he was murdered, as y'all were assigned for a mission in Cervejo in 1992. What information were you given to prepare for reporting his murder, and did you complete the original mission you were sent there for?
Well, it is a somber question, and I'll never forget the night in my office downstairs. Picture on my wall is of my producer. We had gone to Sarajevo with the then Prime Minister of Yugoslavia, who was an American citizen, but he was a Yugoslav in his past, and the man who was running Yugoslavia thought it would be great to try to have him as the prime minister so that he get more from the United States. And we'd gone to Sarajevo, and at the airport, I told Kaplan, my producer, you have to stay here, because I was riding in an armored vehicle with the prime minister. But he didn't. He said, I might need him. And so he hitched a ride with a news van that was also at the airport. There were other reporters at this time in Sarajevo. And he rode in the back of the van. And about 500 yards out of the airport toward town, a sniper shot at the van. The van was not marked. It didn't say press. It didn't say anything. And the bullet hit David Kaplan. And when he was brought in on a stretcher, someone said to me, that's David Kaplan. I said, what? The French worked on him for about an hour, but he was probably already gone by the time he got to the aid station. So I was not prepared in the sense of having thought about it a lot, but I knew we called New York. I called New York. I got hold of the appropriate person at ABC News and told what had happened. We got hold of someone to go see his widow and be there when I called her. And then I did the report from Good Morning America, and I was kind of maudlin, I think, and all of that. And that night, back in Belgrade, where we flew back with the Prime Minister and put together a long number of pieces for our primetime live program, which was on that night. The way we did that was that we had an assistant producer, and I would write a piece of the script, because when you're on the road, you don't have time to write a television script and then massage it and change it and does this sound bite go there? You just have to start. So I'd write the first paragraph, hand it to the assistant producer, and then he'd find pictures to put over it, and I'd cry a little bit. then it's my turn to write another paragraph, and he'd sit there and cry a little bit, and then we've got the piece done about David Kaplan. And I thought at that point, I didn't have to go to Sarajevo. American forces were not there. American troops were not there. When I was in Vietnam, of course, reporters went there because we, the United States, was fighting there. I had to go, but you didn't have to do this. And so I said I would never, I'd gone to the first Gulf War. I didn't go to the second Gulf War. I'm not going to do that. I was out of the game then. Thanks for the question.
Good question, Savannah, and you did fine research. You did excellent research on the questions that you asked. So thanks for looking into those things. Sam, I think we're going to continue to challenge your memory with Heather, who has.
Good luck. My memory today is, como si, como sa. Maybe so, maybe not. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Heather Inman, and I'm a junior at SAM. And my question is, and I'm a psychology major. What inspired you to become a television journalist, and at which age did you decide to do so?
Well, I have to admit, I fell into it in the sense of I've already described it, how I didn't set out life saying I'm going to be a television journalist. But I liked the news business, even when I was doing just disc jockey work in El Paso. I'd go down on election night and we'd broadcast all night in return. When I first started, I have to admit to you, I thought it was exciting. It was lots of fun. and I was learning things. And finally I got on, though, as you do it more and more, you get on to why you're there. Yes, you're trying to earn a living, but you're there to bring people information that you believe when you bring it is factual. And there are many ways to try to check whether it's factual, as you know. And if it's not, then you try to correct it when you can, although the correction very seldom catches up with the original report. I've only made 1 or 2 reports which were wrong, just dead wrong. I tried to correct the first one the next night on the ABC Evening News, and I did correct it. And as we say, took full responsibility for making the error because it was basically mine. I hadn't checked it thoroughly enough. But I'm sure some people, if they remember it at all, still remember that I'd said something which was wrong. So you remember, and I started learning what it was to be a reporter and why you were there. Report information. Yes, the idea is to let the public that listens to you or reads you then make up the mind, if you've given it some factual material, what it wants to do with it. How do I see this? I mean, here's information about the economy. Here are statistics. Here is a report of what people who know about these things say, but what do I think? Because there's always, when it comes to our economy, many sides and many tensions of what we should do. Some people believe we should not tax much, but of course we spend a lot. And so we have a $23 trillion deficit. When Jimmy Carter left office, we had less than $1 trillion national debt. We have $23 trillion now because we spend a lot of money, waste a lot perhaps, but we spend it on good things, but we've decided we don't have to pay for it. Hey, so the tooth fairy is over there, let the tooth fairy pay. It's called supply side economics. I talked to my friend Arthur Laffer, who in 1979 at an Occidental restaurant in Washington wrote on a napkin a curve, which showed, he said, that you have to tax, but if you tax too much, now you kill business. Right. You kill incentive. Correct. You kill an economy that could use the money to create new businesses. That's right. I agree with that theory. And I'd say to him, Arthur, where is the point though where you've taxed too little? Show me on your curve where, okay, you can tax up to this, but don't cut beyond that. We couldn't. And we have a lot of people who think you just keep cutting the taxes and keep spending the money, and the grandkids will pay for it maybe if they're still here. Now, I know that wasn't your question. I've used your question and hijacked it to give you another piece of how I feel about something, but thank you for the question.
Thank you.
And Heather, why don't you go ahead and follow up and see if he'll answer your follow-up.
My question is, which president was the most interesting to cover during your time as chief White House correspondent? President Carter, Reagan, or Clinton?
Well, I've said and suggested at least Reagan because of his dominance, his force of personality, his charm, if you want to call it that, his presentation. Let me tell you something about this, and particularly those of you who study politics and maybe run for office. Maybe it's unfortunate, but in this television age, in this age of mass communications, presentation is more than 50% of the battle. If someone once told me, for instance, that Albert Einstein, the genius that I never met, was not someone you would invite to dinner with other people on Saturday night to have a scintillating, wonderful conversation where people laughed and told jokes and also stories. They said he was all business, unless you said, well, Mr. Einstein, X equals Y to the 10th power, this, that, and the other. He had nothing to say. Of course, you would invite him because he was a genius. And by the way, one of his favorite sayings, I thought, was when he said, the difference between genius and stupidity and ignorance is that genius is limited. Okay, thanks very much. So presentation is what gets the votes, unfortunately, you say. I want to talk about saving the planet from global warming and from our noxious fumes that are killing everything. Yes, that's more important than, hello, it's me and I'm terrific. And in the case of Ronald Reagan, I'm an interesting person and you've seen some of my movies. And yet that's where, if you're standing in someone's light, Einstein had no light except the brilliance of his geniuses. Reagan had a lot. Jimmy Carter, I thought, was a good president. He suffered some problems that were not his making, and he wasn't able to solve them. And I have no quarrel with the votes that were cast against him in 1980. Clinton's another thing. I think he goes down in history in a way that he certainly wouldn't like to. Not a terrible way, not terrible. He's not Richard Nixon, I mean, this, that, and the other. But he was a man-child. The man part of him was wonderful. He knew things. He knew facts. He studied theories. He came up with proposals. The child part of him, and not just talking at one incident, was not admirable. It was not good. Other presidents, I won't go down a whole list for you now. It wasn't your question. But in my time in Washington, we've had some that I thought were really good presidents, human beings. One or two not really good presidents. But the only way you get to be president is through, these days, your presentation. If you just think you can make it on 26 proposals on your website and you can tell people go to them and study them, and I think you'll agree with me that I have something to offer, you're not going to be president.
Heather, thank you very much for those questions. And Sam, great answers. It's really almost an encyclopedic knowledge. But speaking of presentation, I think Michaela has a question for you about your presentation.
Hi, my name is Michaela Hubert. I'm a senior mass communication student. And my question for you is, what kind of reporting style would you say that you have? And can you explain a little bit about your style?
Well, I was an assertive person, always have been. The fire is a little banked now at this age, but still. When I got into the news business, began to learn about it, began to learn how to do it. I discovered as a political reporter, much of my job was to question politicians, obviously. Yes, to look at what they are doing and report on that accurately. But I discovered that you've got to ask a direct question, and the question has to have a point. And it can't be, there was a question famously asked of Lyndon Johnson by a reporter early in his presidency. Mr. President, is it a terrible job? Is it I can't remember exact words, but it was sort of, no, you could frame a question to ask whether he is up to the job in a different way. And you should ask only one question. If you say, Mr. President, you have a bill on your desk, are you going to sign it, sir? And may I ask also, what is your theory about handling Turkey? And finally, no. Now he can answer any of the three parts to your question or answer none of them. So you just have to be hot, straight, and true. And I did that, and I was able to do that. I think, with the exception of this president, and that's my personal opinion, you should be in awe of the President of the United States. It is an important job, and the person who holds it has a great sway over our lives, and because of our dominance in the world since World War II, over the world, and people's lives who don't even speak English. That's fine, or Spanish. But you can't be afraid of that, and you can't act as if you have to pull your forelock and bow and scrape. Now, what's happening today, of course, is reporters are loose. They tell him he lies. Why do you lie? And this, that, and the other. And I cringe a little bit about that because to me, that's not something we did. But I can see why today with this person, I interviewed him in 1990. His business, Forbes magazine, the business magazine, had done an investigation of his worth because he was like, I'm a billionaire. And they printed an article saying they think he's worth maybe $500 million, not $1 billion, not several $billion. So I called him up, and Mr. Trump, and I'd do an interview for our primetime live program. Well, okay, I'll give you 26 minutes, because Donald J. Trump loves the press. Yes, he's used the press as a whipping boy, if you will, for his base, to tell him we're the enemy of the American people, but he actually likes it. He wants the publicity. So I went down and I did an interview with him, and I had a good staff that helped prep me on this article and the background. He owed money for his airline. He borrowed it for an airline. He owed money for his hotel, the Plaza Hotel. He borrowed it. He owed money that he used to build an $846 million casino, the Taj Mahal. And the word was he couldn't pay it back because he was saying, well, he said, what do you know about borrowing? But if you were smart and you're not, you'd want to see my books. I said, send the books. Yes, we'll hire an accountant. Well, I might do that. I'm still waiting. He hasn't sent them yet. He said, you're rude to me. I tried to interrupt him at one point because I needed to get in a question. He was like me. He just started talking, and that was the end of it. And at the end, he said, you're out to get me. And I was not out to get him. I was out to ask him questions that I thought were pertinent. I was not out to get him at that time. Now, at the end, he lost everything, and he would not be someone we'd know if a real billionaire named Carl Icahn hadn't picked up his debt on the Taj Mahal. He went bankrupt with the others and lost it to Citicorp, the hotel and the airline. But Icahn picked up the debt and paid the debt as it came due and gave him a management thing. And then, of course, as you know later, Burnett gave him The Apprentice, You're Fired, presentation, and the rest is history.
Michaela, do you want to follow up on that and ask Mr. Donaldson a second question?
Yes.
He wants to know whether I remembered the first question. I just went off with, hey, if I'll take it, I'll take it down the creek. Go ahead, Michaela.
Okay. My second question for you is, how would you like to be remembered?
No, Michaela, I'd like to be remembered as someone who tried to do an honest job and generally did do an honest job. I've never purposely made a mistake, obviously. I've never purposely done something that later I thought was the wrong thing to do. But I don't think I'm going to be remembered in any real sense, except by some of my friends. Pete remembered it. He had him on the program. Now, Pete and I have written books. And if I was just noticing, Pete, the other day that your great book, which is Ruffled and Flourished, a novel about the relationship between press and presidents and press secretaries, is out of print. It was 2009, but I checked Amazon. Folks, you can get it. Michaela, you can get a copy if you don't have one already for $2.93 on Amazon. It's a used one, and someone turned it in, but it's worth reading. So I wrote a book too, and you can, if you get a used copy for 50 cents on that, it's called Hold On, Mr. President. You get some of the answers that you're asking about how I did this and why I did this, and if I want to be remembered, that I was more eloquent in the writing than I am today in the delivery.
Michaela?
Sam, do you remember you wrote some of your book in my office?
Well, you were a star.
No, you were just using my office to camp out and write some of your book.
By the way, am I Sparta?
Thank you for being the PR.
You called the president Crayon. What Crayon? And at the star of your novel, obviously press secretary, you called what, Socks?
Yes. Thank you for the plug, by the way.
And you said your nemesis in the press corps was Sparta. Now, was that me or was that Helen?
You know, after when my book came out, Hugh Sidey asked me one day, he said, okay, let's start putting names to real people in your book, Pete. And I said, you can't, Hugh, they're all composites. So it would be, you couldn't say any one person is any one of you. By the way, Sam, I might add that Sam Houston State University, I adapted it as a play and they performed it here. And currently I'm adapting it with a very talented composer here at Sam Houston. We're adapting it as a musical. So I hope you'll come see it when we do it.
Well, if you give me a free ticket, I mean, I'm down on my luck like Americans today. It hasn't rained here.
Well, now you're really putting me to the test.
Well, it hasn't rained, and we used to run some cattle in a small cattle ranch, and it didn't rain last year. And I said, okay, we try to make them go through the winter. And it hasn't rained this year, so I said, sell them all, brother. So I'm no longer in the cattle business.
But you are on your ranch, correct?
Oh yeah, no, I still have that. No.
And where are you now? Are you on the ranch?
No, I'm in Albuquerque. We have a house right against the Sandia Mountains, and it's wonderful. You see the town, particularly at night on the other direction, and you say, well, that's very romantic, until I tell you that the translation of the word Sandia into English is watermelon. So when I say we have a house on the Watermelon Mountains, it loses something there. I think I'm taking up too much of your time, and we have other students we'd like to get to.
Well, Sam, and yes, we have Jay Lynn who wants to get us back on track with more discussions of your style and your technique for getting answers out of people. So Jay Lynn, go right ahead.
Hi, Mr. Donaldson. My name is Jalen Garcia, and I am from Corpus Christi, Texas. I am a senior mass communications here at SAM. You were talking about your book just now, Hold On, Mr. President, and my question's actually referring to that, which I would just like to add, if anybody does want to read it, they have it at our library here on campus. So in the book, you talk about when covering a president, you always try to remember two things. And one of those things being, which you wrote, the questions don't do the damage, only the answers do. So my question for you is, what are the do's and don'ts of eliciting information out of people?
Well, I always came to a press conference, or if it wasn't a press conference, walking along with Jimmy Carter or someone, thinking, what's the question today? I was not a historian. I'm not there like Bob Woodward has become, to gather for a book or to gather for history. But there'll be something that day comes up, and you ask the question. Some questions are more important than others in the long march of history, but you try to get an answer, and you have to ask a direct question. Let me tell you something. The last time I was in the White House press room, George W. Bush was president, and they were remodeling the room. And I just finished it, I guess, to call it the James Brady press room. Brady, of course, was horribly wounded on the day that a man standing 5.5 feet away from me fired 6 shots and took down 3 people. And a fourth got in his limousine, but thank goodness they got into the hospital after they tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan, you recall.
Peter, you were not with the White House at that fateful, was that March 30th when Reagan was shot?
Yeah, I was actually in Houston at that time, and I was working on a book, and the two primary spokesmen for Reagan at that point were Jim Brady and Larry Speaks, both of whom were longtime friends of mine in Washington. I knew them well. And of course, Jim Baker had become the chief of staff, for who was really one of my mentors in my career. And I'd just come from helping run his campaign for Attorney General of Texas. And so I was in Houston the day of the assassination attempt on President Reagan, and my phone rang and somebody said, "Hey, are you watching TV?" And I said, "No." And next thing I turned it on, and there's my good friend Jim Brady lying on the sidewalk there in Washington, and seriously wounded. And like everyone, I was shocked. But out of that the next thing was Jim Baker contacted me about a week or so later and said, "Look, Brady's your friend. You've also, you've worked in the White House previously, which I had for President Ford." And he said, "Larry Speaks is a good friend of yours, and you know us." So right now, this is a tough situation. You could come up here right now and be of help to us. And I said, well, gosh, of course, Jim, I'll be glad. Of course, I'm on the way. He said, no, wait, I've got to come to Houston in 2 weeks for a speech and we can visit then. So 2 weeks later, he came here and I went over to meet him. It was at the old Shamrock Hotel, now gone from Houston, the legendary Shamrock Hotel. And I said, Jim, there's nothing to talk about. I'm on the way. This is, in a situation like this is what you do. In my view, it was helping my country. And I said, I'll be there tomorrow. And he said, okay. He said, don't rush, but yeah, okay. So then, just as an aside, I said to him, and I said this because he knew my mother. Jim Baker knew my mother pretty well, and she had a fig tree in her backyard, and she used to make fig preserves, and she'd send them to him there in Washington, and he really liked those fig preserves. So I said to him, I tell you what, Baker, I said, if my mother thinks I should do this, I'll do it. I just said that kind of half smiling. Well, he then became very serious. He said, okay, let's go see her right now. And I thought to myself, yeah, right. The chief of staff in the White House, who right now has a recovering president, a seriously wounded press secretary, a multitude of issues sitting on his desk, he's going to go see my mother to try and convince her I should take this job as a spokesman for the president. I said, okay, Jim, I was kidding. Of course I was kidding. He said, no, I'm serious. Let's go see her. Well, I said, okay. Well, I didn't call her or anything. We just went over to her house. We were about 5 minutes away. We go over, we walk in. She happened to be sitting in the living room at this little desk where she worked. Not a word was spoken. She looked up and kind of smiled and then said, Jim, you know he's going to do it. And by the way, here are your fig preserves.
Hey.
Well, it's good. Sam's back now. How's that?
It's snowing here. And guess what? We had a momentary interruption in the power. And guess what happened? I came back.
It's snowing there in Albuquerque?
Oh, yes. It didn't snow when I needed it. No moisture fell on the grass for the cattle to eat. But right now, about 7 or 8 inches. And I'm back, and I don't know whether we can continue or not. It's up to you.
Yes, no, we're going to continue. You haven't missed anything, Sam, other than me telling the story of how I came to work in the Reagan White House via Jim Baker. So,
well, James Addison Baker III, I saw him last year. It was a commemoration of the year the wall came down, and we had a good time in Washington. Anyway, I'd forgotten the question that I was in the midst of filibustering.
Not to worry. We're going to pick one thing I do want to do, though, Sam. Wesley, maybe you could show those 2 photographs I gave you. I have 2 photographs here, Sam. Let's see. Well, that's you and me in my office.
Sam, you look frightened.
I recognize you, but I don't recognize this guy with his fingers in his mouth. Is that something, or just trying to plug up a stream of consciousness?
I was doing my best to try and convince you of something, and you were buying none of it, of course. Show the other one, Wesley.
That reminds me of the day that Ronald Reagan came to the press room to do something, and everyone went live. In those days, if the president comes to the press room, all the networks, and there were just 3 networks. CNN was in business, but not really. And while he was talking, Nancy Reagan and wheeled in a cake. His birthday was not that day, but was nearby. And so on national television with people watching, we had a birthday cake party. And Nancy said, well, here, let's give a piece to Sam Donaldson. And I said, well, I wouldn't sell out for a piece of cake. He said, oh, Sam, you sold out for a lot less.
Hey, Sam, here's a photo of us out on the South Lawn.
I see you with James A. Baker III.
And you're over here on the left.
I'm over here, right. I'm out of position, though. I'm trying to get in, though, as you see. And is that Fitzwater back there or someone else?
Yeah, Marlon's back there. Speaks has his back kind of to us.
Yeah.
You're next. You talk about a row. There's you. Then there's Chris Wallace.
Helen right over here.
Here's Helen. Yeah, the great Helen Thomas.
Murderer's Row.
Yeah.
Leslie by this time had left the White House, I think, to go to do the morning show. And of course, for that, she went into the wonderful 60 Minutes. And she's been there.
Yep. Okay, Wesley, thanks. Little step back in history there. Mike, we probably need to go back to Jalen.
Yeah, Sam, that was a picture of you at work. And I think Jalen's question to you was very specific about your technique and your do's and don'ts of eliciting information.
Okay. We're talking now not eliciting information, someone gives you a press release or somebody reads a statement, but questioning presidents and others. Well, you ask a question, you ask a direct question, you ask a follow-up if you have an opportunity to do that. And you don't take no for an answer, except you have to. If it's the president, you can't sit there, I'm going to argue with you all night. That's not going to work. I've asked a number of questions, and some of them I'm most proud of in the sense that I think it enlisted information are not great questions in themselves. When we discovered that the United States was selling arms through Israel to Iran in exchange for hostages of ours that the Iranian Hezbollah people in Lebanon were holding, Reagan for the first 30 days or so denied it. He kept denying it. I mean, here's the evidence right in front of you. And he kept saying, no, that's not true. But it was true. And so at one of his first news conferences, when he called me, I said, well, Mr. President, I've been holding our hostages for some time now. And we've tried many ways to get them released, and it wasn't successful. So if selling arms to Iran was not the way, not the reason they were released, why do you think they were released? Why did suddenly Iran's stodgy people in Lebanon release them? What is your theory? Well, it's the kind of question that even presidents can't be briefed on. Another question was, one day I got up and I asked him, Mr. President, they're saying on the floor of the Senate that Martin Luther King Jr. was a communist sympathizer because the Senate was debating whether to make his birthday a national holiday. Do you agree? I mean, I'm just a patsy question. I'm asking whether he agrees. He said, well, we'll know in 35 years, won't we? Because Dr. King's papers at that point were going to be sequestered and not released for 35 years, his personal papers. And then he went on to say some other things, but he had to call Coretta King the next morning and apologize and say that the press had distorted his answer completely. Well, why would he give an answer like that? Earlier that day, as was the usual case, he was being briefed by his staff in the family theater. They were playing reporters. They'll ask you this question: what should be your answer, sir? Or this, if they ask you this, we suggest you answer that you know. And someone said, well, someone wants to know how you feel about what's being said about Dr. King being a communist sympathizer during the debate over making his day a national holiday. What would you say? And Reagan kind of cracked, well, I'll say we'll know in 35 years, won't we? And everyone laughed and ha, 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 ha. Well, he wouldn't say that, would he? Yes, he would. And yes, he did. And the final question I'll tell you about was one time it happened, an event occurred that I thought was worth asking about. On a day he held one of his infrequent news conferences, and he called me and I said, and again, when we talk to Ronald Reagan, or any president for that matter, if you think he needs to be brought up to speed on what you're talking about, you do. You don't just say, okay, what's the price of soybeans? A senator in Iowa recently. So he called me and I said, well, Mr. President, today 19 blacks were shot to death in the township of Soweto by the forces of the white minority South African government. Does this cause you to re-examine your policy of towards South Africa and perhaps consider sanctions? Well, he said, now, Sam, now the way you put it is if all the violence was coming from the force of law and order. Well, of course, the forces of law and order were using guns, and the blacks in the streets were throwing rocks. And so I didn't really think that equated, but I didn't follow up. He didn't give me a chance. But that too made a little And perhaps my best question from the standpoint of revealing something important was his first news conference. Now, when Reagan came to the presidency, we all knew, by we, I don't mean us smart reporters, but the country knew how he felt about communism, particularly about the Soviet Union. He had preached it for years. He had done his radio broadcast while he was out of power. I mean, there was not a stronger anti-communist, particularly opponent of the Soviet Union than Ronald Reagan. We knew that, but he's now president. And when he said things not being president, it didn't really matter. When he says things as president, it matters. When he called on me, I said, Mr. President, do you think the Soviet Union is really interested in détente or by some other means pursue a policy of attempt at world domination? And out it came. They lie, they cheat, they steal, they'll commit any crime in pursuit of their, I mean, wow, thank you. If you're in the Kremlin, you take notice. Whoa. You take notice. And so they did take notice, and everybody else did too, because once he became president, what he says counts. Now, unfortunately, in a way, and fortunately another way, many people around the world and in the United States no longer pay any attention to what Donald J. Trump says as president, except that that's his latest view of something. All right, we cut off negotiations, there'll be no stimulus. Less than 24 hours later, hey, I want a big stimulus bill. Let's start the talk about whiplash. So how do you take seriously something a president says when you know that 5 minutes later, he may change his mind completely? I mean, everyone was excited when shortly after he became president, he announced one day, that he had made a deal with Chuck and Nancy, two of his best friends. That's Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, on the DACAs, on the Dreamers. They'd made a deal so they could stay in the United States. And we said, wait a moment, maybe we have maybe we've been wrong about this guy. A few hours later, once his base in horror, because they thought they'd let someone throw them all out, get them out, get those brown people. He changed it 180 degrees. So when as a reporter are you going to say, yes, here's the president's policy. I heard it from his own lips. He has no policy except what's good for me and what makes me look like a star. Okay, enough of this.
Well, Sam, that contrast between the 80s and now actually ties into Jaylen's follow-up question here, which she will not take no for an answer on, as you put it. So go ahead. And by the way, Jaylen, you're winning an award here for screen time, so make the most of it.
Thank you. Second question is, what are some thoughts you have about the current presidential debates compared to previous ones?
No, Jaylen, it's a fancy question, but I'm glad you asked it. I've seen every, no, that's not true. I missed, as a non-reporter yet, I missed two of the Kennedy-Nixon debates. Not the first one, which set the stage and which was what everyone remembers. And I've watched and participated in the auditorium, if you will, as a reporter, all the other debates. And has anyone ever seen anything like this? This ain't Lincoln Douglas. And I wasn't there for that debate. Television hadn't been invented yet. This was a smash down. Donald J. Trump came to smash down Biden, to demand the stage. Now, this was not new. In the second debate with Hillary Clinton, when it came to be her turn to speak, if you go back and watch the tape of it, instead of sitting down, Trump looms behind her and walks behind her. It's her turn to speak. She's now delivering whatever she's about to say. And I said later, I wish she turned around and said, now, Donald, sit down. It's my turn. And if he didn't sit down, slap his face. I would love to have seen it. I mean, he might have gotten another million votes or something. Well, in this case, Trump came to do this to Biden, but he wasn't successful. He came off, we now know from data. In other words, the Bloomberg campaign, short-lived as it is, gave away bags which said, in God we trust, all else bring data. We know from data that he lost ground, even with some of his base, not most of his base, but with some of it, by being this oaf this buffoon, this man desperately trying to not follow the rules. And may I say, for Chris Wallace, I think he did a masterful job. Now, he started off thinking this would be a normal situation. And as Trump started this, Chris is thinking, well, what am I going to do? And he started, gentlemen, now please follow the rules. And if you watch the last 30 minutes of the debate, Chris finally realizes he's got to step out of a impartial moderator. He's got to now put on shackles. And in the last 30 minutes, he elicited from Donald J. Trump, okay, stand back and stand ready. Oh, really? Oh, where's the dog whistle for white supremacists everywhere? And Trump once again doubled down on, thanks to Chris's questioning, because he now entered it, that he would not necessarily accept the results, as some people claimed that they had occurred in this election. So, and finally, the moderators began to get it, particularly Savannah. Oh, Tigers. Oh, be Savannah, Guthrie. Get in there. And then she's supposed to be the moderator, and it's supposed to be a town hall, but she won't take the lies. She won't just take this. As her famous is go down and talk. What are you going to be remembered for? First thing about Savannah, well, you're not somebody's crazy uncle. You have to do it now. Now, the last debate was more civil, more gentlemanly. There was the moot. And until the last, again, if you watch the last 30 minutes, Donald Trump escaped. This character who showed up and was following the instructions of his staff, don't be rude, follow the rules. He even said, oh, that earlier the day of the debate, he had called Savannah in one of his tweets, oh, terrible, and she's terrible, and you know what she did. Oh, you're doing a good job, he said. You can see he's gritting his teeth as he's saying that. But toward the end, he becomes the real Donald, and he tries to get in there, and he does the lies and all of this. I don't think we have we don't have good polling yet on the second debate. We have some. There appears to be no change in the dynamic of the race because of the second debate. The first debate began, Biden was ahead already, but began to add to his momentum. I mean, I said, really, with Donald Trump there doing his Trumpism, all you have to do, if you're Joe Biden, show up, don't fall faint on the floor, don't babble completely, just watch it, because he'll do for you what even you yourself could not do for you as well. So will we have future debates? I hope we have future debates. I hope they return to a civil debate of ideas, because they have made a difference. I don't have all the time to take up in your time, but all the debates that I've seen that have made some difference. And one debate, as I saw, was clearly a debate that sealed the election for one of the participants. Whereas many debates gave one or the other momentum, made a mistake or what have you. But on this debate, it was the second debate between Ronald Reagan and Walter Mondale. On the first debate, Reagan, who was only then 74, but was clearly aging, and remember he'd been shot a few years earlier. At the end of the debate, when it came time for summation particularly, he just babbled. I mean, go look at it. I mean, this man, you look, the country was going, because everyone wanted to re-elect Reagan, but not if he was. So came to the second debate, and he was ready for the question from Henry Tewitt, great reporter of the time from Baltimore Sun. I don't remember Tewitt's exact wording, but it was, Mr. President, do you think, sir, that you are up to a second term, that you'll have the stamina? I mean, he worded the question very politely, but and Reagan was ready. He said, Mr. Tewitt, yes, I'm fit and I can do very well in the second term. But he said, and by the way, I'll promise right now that I will not make my opponents' youth and relative inexperience an issue in this campaign. And everyone left, and the camera was on Walter Mondale. Mondale, his opponent, was the camera came back to Reagan, and the old guy picked up a glass of water, smiled, and took a sip. I looked at that and I said, game, set, match. And sure enough, he was handily reelected. Debates matter.
Jaylen, you did a very good job of asking questions to elicit information. And Sam, good answers. We've got a couple of students left to ask questions. And Cody McDowell is our next questioner, and he's got some questions about third-party candidates.
Hello there. First of all, it's an honor to meet you. I've been a big fan of your reporting for a long time, and you're doing exactly what I dream of.
I don't know you, except I've just heard you, but I see already you're too easily pleased. But thank you.
Well, my name is Cody McDowell. I'm from Austin, Texas. I'm a senior at Sam Houston, and I'm a mass comm major. My first question is, with the recent divide in the two debates, do you see a possible third-party candidate coming through on the debate floor anytime soon? Of course, a third-party candidate does have to get a certain percentage of the U.S. popular vote to be eligible, and we haven't seen a third-party candidate win the election since 1850. So,
well, you're good on history, and of course, in 1992, we had a third-party candidate who was in the debates. Ross Perot, the Texas billionaire, he was a real billionaire, against George Herbert Walker Bush, number 41, the president of the United States, seeking re-election, and Bill Clinton. And Ross didn't really make a great impression, except he got 19% of the vote. He never got a delegate, but he got 19%, which I think was the high water mark, certainly in modern times. There had been others who had tried. Anderson, I think, in 1980, had tried in the Republican Party. I do not see, I see the need, the pressing need is to restore a second party. Call it the Republican Party or call it something else. But we do need, we don't want a one-party state. We don't want just the Democratic Party running the country. We want a push against it, just as we want to push against the old Republican Party. But the old Republican Party was responsible. It had a different view. And traditionally, the two parties had represented different parts of our society. The Republican Party represented the employers, the people who had the money, that made the jobs, if you will. And the Democratic Party represented the people who worked for the people who had the factories and the jobs and made the money. And the tension went back and forth. And I think it was good for society. I didn't agree with some of the policies of either party, and particularly perhaps the people who owned the factories and originally wouldn't pay the workers much money, and their working conditions were terrible. But we need to restore or have a second party. Call it the Republican Party if you still think the name is viable. But today there's no Republican Party. There's some good Republican people who still adhere to the values as I understand them and as I grew up with them here in New Mexico in a Republican household. And for the first part of my life, certainly leaned toward the Republicans. Then I went to Washington, began to read the Washington Post, the New York Times. Did I ever see the Daily Worker? Communist didn't know, but and I went bad, I suppose, and changed my view of life and this country. And then eventually I was so fortunate because of my job to go around the world 8 times and be taken around free by my business following presidents and also myself. I mean, if you haven't seen the way other people live, if you haven't seen their needs, if you haven't seen why they worship as they worship a particular God or a particular religion, then you have really no great understanding of what it means for the United States to be a leader, because we're getting along with not just leading, but we're understanding and accommodating the views and the needs of other people in this world. There are 8 billion people in the world, I'm told. Now I'm going to give you a statistic. My heritage comes from Scotland, I think. I haven't taken the test, but that's what the people tell me in my family. There are 8 billion people in the world, and 11.1% of them are white. 11.1%. Now, if you think we can build a wall around this country, either physically or not physically, but in effect, to preserve a white Christian America, you're committing our children and grandchildren to suicide. we have to get along with the world. We have to do this. And I think we'll be able to do it, but we need two parties in this country to go back and forth. There was a time right after World War II, Franklin Roosevelt, before he died, of course, was president and had been president for so long. But Arthur Vandenberg, who was the leading Republican in the Senate, he was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, or the leading Republican on the committee, said, politics stops at the water's edge. In other words, you fight domestically, you fight over policy, but when it comes to supporting the United States policy around the world, he said, you know, Republicans ought to support the president. And where are those days? Gone with the wind.
Sam, I think Cody has a follow-up as well.
I'm a huge fan of satirical jokes, especially the ones with you and Ronald Reagan. Despite being called the Burr and Reagan saddle, how did you feel when asking the toughest questions to possibly the strongest man on the planet?
Well, I mean, yes, the jokes and all of that. Once before the terrible tragedy of Challenger, the shuttle that blew up with the Christian McCullough and the civilian, you know, and others, the astronauts who died, there was the idea that they would have a journalist go into space. And we all had set in our resumes and all that to try to be the journalist. And there was a cartoon that showed me strapped to the outside of the missile as it was going up. Kennedy said, Sam Donaldson, ABC News, headed for the moon, something like that. Of course, I like some of those cartoons. I have a cartoon back in the other room. And there's a picture of the young Donald Trump. And someone is saying, Ivanka is saying to him, this is back in 1990, Donald, is this a good time to tell you I'm running off with Sam Donaldson? I've shown that picture around. But how do I feel about what? The pictures? All right, took it down that alley. Bring me back to the mainstream. The question was how I felt about something. What was it?
Your emotions, asking the tougher questions to one of the stronger people in the world.
Well, I asked questions I thought at the time were the right questions to ask. Not the only questions I asked. As I've suggested, some of the questions weren't terrific and all that. The worst question, now the word worst is in parentheses, but you'll see why. I ever asked a president of the United States was to Bill Clinton at a primetime news conference. Everyone was carrying it, and he called on me. But the news was such that I thought I should ask it. And I said, Mr. President, Juanita Broaddrick claims you raped her. If that is not true, sir, what was your relationship with Miss Broaddrick, if any? Now, this was after he had escaped conviction in the Senate. But the woman had done television reports. She'd done newspaper front page report of her claim that when he was many years earlier, that he had raped her. Well, he said, I have said that I am not going to spend any more time answering questions like that. I'm going to spend the rest of my time as president to work for the American people. My lawyer has issued a statement on that. And as you know, Donald Kendall, his lawyer, had not been accused of rape. So whatever Kendall's statement was not to me coming from the first authority on the answer to a question. And as he turned away from me, I said to him, sir, can you just say no? And he didn't. He said, see my lawyer. Now that's the worst question. I defend asking it to this day, not as the most brilliant question or most important question to the United States or to anyone for that matter. But you're asking me how I feel asking questions. I must tell you, I was not pleased necessarily with myself for asking it, but I'll say I still think I should have.
Very good. Thank you, Cody. Thank you very much. And Sam, we have one more student with two questions about the industry and hopefully drawing on your advice.
Well, may I say to the student whose name I've copied down here, but I don't know if it's going to be that person. It's in the Bible, the Christian Bible, and the last shall be first. So go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Donaldson. My name is Danielle Garza, and I'm a senior at Sam Houston, and I'm majoring in mass communication. And my question for you is, what advice would you give to an upcoming journalist, especially in a time of fake news?
Well, I've touched on some of it, but I'll sum it up for you this way. You do your job to bring information to the public that you believe is accurate on matters of importance to the public. I mean, if you want to go into the business of doing Hollywood gossip, that's okay. We all want to hear that. Who's J-Lo's new boyfriend or what have you. But even there, I would say to you, pin it down, try to be accurate and bring it to the public. Second, in doing this, of course, you ought not to play favorites. Now, I've already said that this era we're in at the moment, things have changed. You try to be fair to all sides, but if you're doing investigative work particularly, and you're doing your job with your team, you're going to come to a conclusion. If the story is that the plant is dumping stuff in the river, that children are growing sick down the river because of the water fumes from the river, and the accusation is it's dumping stuff that's far above EPA values, and you start to investigate, you'll talk to the parents who say, look at my child, and the doctors don't know what's causing it, but they suspect it's this, that, and the other from the river. And you go to the plant manager, and plant manager said, Danielle, I'm so glad you're here, because I'll show you that we conform to EPA standards on everything. We do not dump junk into the river. Here's our inspection reports, and we're just not doing it. But you take samples of the river water that's coming out of the flume from the plant, and you send it not to one, but to 3 laboratories, separate laboratories, say, analyze this water. And all 3 of them come back and say, this water contains toxic materials far above the legal and the medically correct standards. So when you go on, or you write your story, what do? Say, well, the plant manager says this, and the parents say that. What do you think, guys, out there in television land? No, you say the plant is dumping stuff in the river. That's not taking sides. That's not, oh, you didn't give the fair to the other side. No, you be fair to the truth. Be fair to the truth as you can divine it. And again, if you make a mistake, clear it up to the best of your ability down the line. And don't worry about people. You're not there to win a popularity contest. You're not there to have, oh, God, we love this is the greatest reporter in the world because, this, that, the other, and hey, I fooled that person here. You're there to do your job. And not everyone is going to like you. Certainly politicians, I've never known a politician, and I've known quite a few that I've admired. Are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, because my screen just, I'm scared now that we had it one thing. I've many on both sides. I mean, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives that I've liked, I've admired. I thought they did a good job for their constituents. We're not on the take as far as I could tell. But you're not there to have everyone like you. And I've never met a politician. If you do a report that turns out because of the facts to be very favorable to the president, but 8 or 9 or 10%, you say this, that, or other, which is not that's what you'll remember. Oh, but I said correctly that you've done this and done that and done that. Yeah, I know. But you also pointed out something that I think is wrong. They'll all do that. But that's human nature. You would, and I would too. If you did a piece, I read a lot of pieces in the old days when I had little prominence that were critical of me, but they'd have some good stuff too. But not the good stuff. That was good. Of course, I deserved that. But look what they said here. I once had a piece done. One of the first pieces that I took notice of me said my suit was baggy. Well, I think it was baggy, but I just resented that, and it was hurt me and all of that. I'm not a clothes horse, but hey, now you can call my suit baggy, and I'll take it as a.
Danielle, do you have a follow-up to that?
My second question is, how do you think that being a journalist back when you started has changed, especially during this era?
Well, first of all, as a television journalist, everything about the way television gathers and delivers its news is preceded by a technical advance. Technology advances. I told you when I came to Washington in 1961, there were 3 television networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And ABC was the third one. It was the funny farm in a way. I was not yet a member of its cast. I was working for a local station. But here came cable.
Mhm.
And because the 3 networks had 98% of television audience. You wanted to watch television, whether it was news or entertainment, you had to watch us. I remember in 1972, I was the Watergate correspondent for the Watergate hearings on Capitol Hill in the Senate. And the first week, all 3 networks carried it live. There was great interest all of a sudden about this break-in at the Watergate and what was happening, and could it reach Richard Nixon? And they lost money. Everyone lost money because they couldn't run commercials during the day. So they decided, the 3 networks, that every third day, one of us would do the gavel to gavel and lose the money, and the others would have commercials on their daytime shows and what have you. So every third day, all summer long, and millions were watching, you had to watch me. You didn't have a choice. Hey, this bozo doesn't know what he's talking about. Or, gosh, look at the baggy clothes he's wearing. You had no choice. So some of us got to be known in the sense that today I watch these good reporters on networks and cable, and they have a good audience, but they could never get the size of audience that I once had, or that people like me had. Then after cable, of course, came the internet, and I don't have to tell you about that. And the social media that on the internet makes everyone, I won't sully the name reporter, makes everyone's opinion up there, right there with the opinion reporter who says, it's not my opinion, here are facts that I've worked hard to assemble for you. No. And you can find the kind of websites, Alex Jones, hey, the conspiratorial theorist. Oh, those kids weren't killed. Those were government actors. And people believe him. Some people, the Holocaust never happened. Listen to me, watch this. And some people believe it. What to do about misinformation? I'm a First Amendment purist, or at least I have been. But I must tell you, the founding fathers thought you get in the village square, stand on your soapbox and say anything you want to, and the government cannot stop you. You say it. Today, there are restraints, obvious ones, against creating panic in the sense of in the street bloodshed by your words. But there's also the question of what do we do about it? I'll ask you students, what do we do about things that are there that millions see, repeat? Yeah, the president, he takes a conspiratorial theory and he repeats it. The pizza theory, the new pizza theory, you know, the one which says Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden are running a sex pornography scheme in the basement of a pizza parlor or something. How do they believe it? Well, okay, Sam, are you saying they don't have the right to do that? In a way, I'm trying to figure out how we can keep that away and still give everyone that has 2 grains of sense in their head the right to express political views, any view. Slander you can sue them, you clean up on that. Donald J. for defamation. And what was the defaming thing about the book? The book claimed that Donald J. Trump in 2005 was only worth $250 million, not billions. And any con man knows that he's ability to be a good con man because of his image. And you take away his image, it's worse than calling him a pedophile to him. And so he sued and lost and all that. But what to do about the First Amendment and what's happening today? I don't have the answer. Do you? What do you think, Danielle?
He asked what you think that we should do about the First Amendment, and
there are 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. I'm talking about the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press. How the freedom of talking, of saying what you want to say. How can we preserve that as the founders wanted it preserved? and accommodate keeping the dangerous junk, not just a bad, if you want to say the earth is flat, go ahead and say it. If you want to say the apple falls up, it doesn't fall down. Newton was wrong. Go ahead and say it. I can disprove that. But young people particularly, and I'm not against young people. I was once young, believe it or not. As they're learning about what's going on in the world, as they're looking at history, what's happened, as they're forming their own ideas in, say, college dorms and arguing, is there really a God? What about this, that, and the other? And you feed them this stuff, which is not just wrong, it's dangerously wrong. Because if you lead them down a path of thinking that these conspiratorial, hey, the pizza thing really works. There is a deep state here. I mean, Trump is being attacked by the QAnon. Okay, if you really feed them that and it takes hold, how do you get it out of them later? Because if you don't get it out of them, what happens through the use of free expression to this country? This country is based on people being able to vote using facts, opinions, and feelings, but in a way that keeps our system of values, keeps system of morality, keeps a system of ethics that we've learned are the best things that help make us this shining city on the hill that Ronald Reagan talked about. How do we keep that? I don't have the answer, but work on it, all of you.
Okay, thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you, Danielle. Sam, we are at the end of our show, but if you will indulge me and if Peter will indulge me before I turn it over to him. Peter promised us a passionate program today, and he nailed that. You clearly still have the passion, and you're really up to date on all your knowledge and the things that are happening. What do you miss most about being in the middle of the fray?
Well, people ask me, would you like to be back there now? No. We have great reporters, women, people of color. I mean, the kinds of people who, when I first started, were kind of shut out of the business, and men, of course, who are doing as good a job as it's possible, in my view, to do with this man and the people that surround him, the sycophants, what I call his group of greedy thugs who do his bidding. And look at the members of the Senate. For shame, the Republicans who could have saved their party and lost it for what? For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? I love to quote the Bible. All right, fine. I don't know. I should really calm down. I've never felt this way about a human being. You see, to me, although I was alive, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot are abstractions in the sense that I know the evil that they perpetrated. I've read about it. I've talked to survivors of their evil, but it was, to me, since I wasn't involved, when they finally came for me, there was no one to talk, Pastor Niemeyer. I've never felt the way I feel about Donald J. Trump. I think he's a blight on the country. He's hurt so many people who are never going to get it back. I'm fortunate. I complain about no rain and I had to sell the cattle. I'm doing okay, believe me, compared to millions in this country now who are being evicted, who are not able to pay their bills, who, we've always had hungry people. Lyndon Johnson had a war going on poverty. If he hadn't been embroiled in the Vietnam War, he would have gone down not only as the best civil rights president we've had since Abraham Lincoln. No, excuse me, President Trump, you are, I know that. He would have gone down as someone who helped bring poverty to a standstill. Not completely, could never do that. But think of what this man has done. And everyone he touches loses. They go to jail, they lose their reputation, they lose their income. Everyone that's close to him, he somehow destroys. And you say, well, they destroy themselves because they allow this to happen. He's seductive in so many ways. And even him, when you get to be president of the United States, there's a certain aura and power there. I've never felt this way about anyone. I want to see him out. And once out, we would never allow if he does the deal with President Pence, we would never allow it to happen. The country would rise up, Constitution or no Constitution. So I want to see him out. I want his crimes to be brought before a grand jury. I want him to have a fair trial on accusations of criminal conduct by jurors that are picked fairly. I want the courts to make certain the trial is fair. If he is convicted of crimes, and I think there's plenty of evidence, it's like Richard Nixon. He left town one step ahead of the sheriff because they told him, yeah, the Senate will remove you. And then if you don't do the deal with Jerry Ford, you go to court. But I want to see Donald Trump convicted. And then I want to see the punishment to be fair. And fair to me is stern.
Well, Sam, on a lighter note, it looks like you have robbed us purposefully. You have turned a painting around to where nobody in the audience can see it. And we can only see the back of the painting and the easel. What are you hiding from us?
This is my wife's. She's on the board of a great institution here called Horizon, which helps young people who don't have much means, or family don't have much means. And to raise money in this virtual society of ours these days, where you can't have a dinner and a ball and people come and a paddle auction, we'll auction off this trinket. Would you pay $1,000 for this little piece of glass? No. They paint it. And she is painting, touching up a paint that she did. Sandy, hello, Sandy. Sandy. My wife's name is Sandy. She's fortunately something, but she won't mind. I'll turn it around for you.
Great.
Now, Sandy does not profess to be an accomplished artist, but this is painting through our front windows of a sunset when there is sun. She's touching it up.
It's got some O'Keefean elements there, Sam.
Well, it'll be auctioned off. And of course, I think people will bid on it. I know I will.
Well, maybe we will get an online bidder.
We're only 54 minutes over time. That's not much. I used to do 5 seconds when I do a minute 30. I always take a minute 35. And put old ABC News, evening news would have to accept it, but 54 minutes. I've enjoyed it thoroughly, and of course, because I get to talk and babble, and I've enjoyed the questions, and I'm sure I didn't answer a lot of them the way, in retrospect, I wish I'd said this or said that. And as you see, my mind runs off. You asked me to go down the river, and I'll go down a tributary, and I'll see another tributary, and then I'll see a third one, and then I'll say to you, where was I? Where were we? And I apologize for that. But Pete, Mike, thank you very much. And the students, you're bright, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Sam. And Peter, thank you for letting me and the students be part of your career with people like Sam Donaldson. And I'll turn it over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Sam, thank you for agreeing to do this today. I appreciate it very much. And I think it's, as always, I'm glad to see you have not lost any of the verve, the enthusiasm for life that I've always known you had, and that you make very...
My friend, and we will find an airplane and jump out of it, but with a parachute. Now,
I'll ask you one last thing, since you do have such an excellent memory. Do you remember the day my late mother, the only time she ever flew on an airplane, she came to Washington, and I brought her over there to the White House, and I brought her to the briefing one day. And she grew up, she was a reporter. She was a journalist.
I know she was.
And I brought her into the briefing room.
Wasn't she also an actor? Well, we call them, everybody's an actor now, not an actress, an actor.
You have an incredible memory, actually. Yes, she was an actress.
I can't say that if you say, okay, here are 4 pictures of middle-aged women. Which one is your mother? I probably don't remember exactly, but I remember you did what you did.
Well, here, I'll help. Wesley, do you still have that picture there? there you two are.
There you are. Ah.
Yeah, that's in my office there at the White House. Do you remember what you did when she came into the briefing room? You came over and next thing y'all were dancing in front of the press corps.
I was just being an exhibitionist and I had a great partner. Two hams, Ronald Reagan, Sam Donaldson. We remember each other.
Thank you, Wesley. Well, you remember the day well. And I was not.
You told me now, if you say down, what did you two talk about or something? I don't remember that. But dancing? Me?
Sam, thank you so much for doing this. And I know all of our students and Wesley and our producer and Mike, we all join in saying thank you. And you take care of yourself out there in Albuquerque. And
well, I didn't go to Sam Houston College, but a number of reporters did, right?
Among whom were Dan Rather.
That's who I had in mind.
Yep. And the last thing I would remind everyone, you're a native born Texan.
Well, that's true, but I'll just take up one more minute of your time. When I was born, my mother was a widow woman. My father, having performed the necessary part of my creation, a few weeks after he did that, had his final heart attack. So, and she said one morning, we lived on a farm. My brother, 15 years older, was already in military school or something. And she said to herself, you know, when she felt it was her time, I'm going to have this one in a hospital because my brother had been born at home. Now, this farm was in New Mexico, is in New Mexico. And she thought the nearest hospital was right over the line in El Paso, Texas. So she drove herself to the Masonic Hospital in El Paso. Well, she was wrong. I've long since done the route. The nearest hospital was the other direction in Las Cruces, New Mexico, by 3/4 of a mile. So it's true, I was born in Texas, and I'm not saying that's a terrible thing, but I'm a native New Mexican. And I'm proud to talk about it because my father was born in Tennessee, a poor boy, came to the Southwest, worked for the railroad when he was young, probably lived on 20 cents a day, saved his money, and he bought his first piece of farmland in the New Mexico Territory in 1910. And I was very proud to tell that story after I learned it. And at the New Mexico Military Institute, my first year roommate was another New Mexico boy named Jose Ortiz y Pino. And I said, Joe, and I told him the story. Hey, father, worked for the same 1910, first piece of farmland. And Joe said, yes, I know about the old land. We got ours from the King of Spain 340 years ago, the Ortiz land grant. I said, you win. It's a better story. And I thought he was a victor until 2 years ago, the Democratic primary people wanting to win the right to take Michelle Lujan Grisham's seat. She's now our governor. She'd been in the House and she gave that up to run for governor. And so all these people in the League of Women Voters said, you're the moderator, ask each one for their name and just one line about them and then start the debate. So I did, and we came to a woman. She said, my name is Deborah Holland and I'm a 35th generation New Mexican. Well, I did the math as quick as I could. 35 generations ago. Yes, she's a Native American. And she is one of 2 Native Americans now in the House of Representatives in Washington. I should have said, you win, you win. Pino's nothing, Donaldson's nothing. You take the prize for being the Mexican of longest standing. So goodbye.
Sam, one last thing. Since the Supreme Court has been in the news quite a bit of late, tell us who you were in the kindergarten class? Who was your kindergarten classmate?
Well, I have a picture of my first school. My mother believed the best schools were in El Paso, and I was driven by her every morning to school in El Paso, grade school and all of that, and back home to the farm in the afternoon. And the first school I was driven to was named Radford School for Girls. Well, I'm not, okay. But they took little boys in kindergarten. And so I have a picture. Here are all the class pictures at the end of the year. I'm a little boy in knee pants, and there are rows of girls in ascending order of height and age. And in the third row is this little girl with a dour expression. She was bronze, and she clearly, as I learned later, she didn't want to be there. I didn't mind being there. I mean, what the hell? I mean, we had people come to assembly. We had a woman named Helen Keller come. They told me she was deaf and mute and couldn't talk and couldn't hear. And Ann Sullivan was there to explain it, and I don't remember her. But we had another woman come, one of our assemblies at Bradford School for Girls, and they told me that she was the wife of a very important person. Well, okay, her name was Eleanor Roosevelt. So here's this class picture. Years later, when the little bronze girl was nominated to be a justice of the United States Supreme Court, I called her up and I said, well, Judge O'Connor, Sandra Day O'Connor, I'm sure you'll be confirmed, but I would like you to tell me that in the conferences, when the justices sit down to begin to talk about how they're going to vote on a particular issue, you let me know, who's ahead. I'll give a scoop. Because if you don't, I have blackmail on you. I have this picture, and all the Democrats know that I'm a good guy, but all the Republicans know that I'm out to get Ronald Reagan and I want to destroy him. And I'll say that you and I come from the same class, and that's the way you feel too. Well, she laughed, fortunately. If she hadn't, I might not be here today. I'm sorry she left the court. She left it to take care of her husband, who's deceased now, who had Alzheimer's. She could have been on the court another several years. And like RBG, I wish you were.
Sam, thank you so much, and you take care out there.
Goodbye. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.